All right, so we're at the end of chapter 16, and this is the basic information about immunity. Now, I went back and pulled up this little flow chart just to kind of look at real quick. So, what it's showing is that a pathogen, when it tries to enter the body, it's got to go past the first line of defense. The first line of defense, which was the mechanical barriers, as it says here, it's the skin and the mucous membranes of all the entry points. Now, if it gets past there, it's going to get to inside our body, and it's going to elicit an immune response. One is going to be what we'll call here the second line of defense, which is still the innate or non-specific immunity. It's the things we looked at: chemical barriers, natural killer cells, inflammation, phagocytosis, and fever. The main thing about these is this line of defense is going to attack everything the same way, and it's usually a pretty good way. But then we have this third line of defense, which we call if we say it's the third line of defense, it is our immune system. The name of it is what we talk about when we talk about immunity. It is the adaptive or specific immune system. And it is made up of two parts: the cellular immune system and the humoral immune system. Cellular is generally going to be T cells. They go and fight hand to hand, basically. And the humoral is going to use the plasma, and those are the B cells, because they turn into what we call plasma cells, and they create antibodies. But this is our immunity. And what happens is, if I have an unknown pathogen that gets in, my body is going to attack it. This is going to attack it all the same way, but these cells are going to try to capture it, and they're going to look at this little thing that we call an antigen, and they're going to analyze it, and from that point on, they know what this cell is and the method that we would have to take in order to kill it. It basically learns its blueprints, and then these cells, after they learn how to fight this, I create memory cells so that if this little guy ever tries to get back in, these guys over here on the second line are going to fight them the same way, but these guys are going to have a better idea of what to do to get rid of them. And that's what we're going to talk about in this portion of it. See, in our immune response, we're going to have a primary, and then all others are called secondary. This only happens one time, and it is when we first encounter a pathogen. All right, so once that antigen for the first time gets into our body is going to take that and analyze it and start figuring out how to kill this pathogen. Antibodies will appear in about a week. They'll remain for several weeks, and lots of memory B cells are produced. Now you see on this, it's days after exposure. It's going to take a few days, and then all of a sudden I'm going to start creating, about 10 days after I've started creating antibodies, my disease is going to peak. My plasma antibodies is going to peak because I'm usually going to start feeling better. Now, all of this time right here, my body is trying to figure out what in the world this antigen is and try to figure out what's the best way to attack it. I'm not going to create a ton of antibodies. I am going to peak a little bit, but I'm not going to create a ton because it's still in a testing phase. Secondary, anytime this antigen decides to make its ugly face known into my body, boom, it's on. As soon as that antigen is detected, these memory B cells will automatically start making antibodies and kick in within a couple of days, and you can see how it spikes. And since we now know what works, we're no longer in this trial and error phase. We know what works. Boom, we're producing antibodies. They're going to spike. They're going to remain actually for months, and then wait to see, you coming again? You coming again? Come on, I'm ready for you. You coming again? And then it'll start dropping off. But those memory B cells can live for years. So if this guy comes back again, boom, we're on it. So when we look at how our immunity works, we classify it in a couple of different ways. And like several of the other things that we have gone through, it's all about just simply understanding words. There are two types of words here, right? There's four types of classifications of immunity. And they are a combination of two different sets of words. One word's called natural. Its counterpart is artificial. One word is called active. Its counterpart is called passive. Natural means it happens as the way nature intends it. Artificial means it's from a test tube. Active means that my body actually takes part in what's going on. Passive, my body doesn't take part in what's going on. Now, if we take those two and just play mix and match, we have naturally acquired active immunity. It is the way nature intended it, and my body takes an active part in it. This is what happens when we come in contact with a disease. I don't care what it is, COVID, what's going on now. If you have been exposed to COVID, your body is going to make these antibodies for it, right? It's the way it is naturally now. There's no vaccine right now. This is the way it naturally happens. In general, I will tell you, this lasts longer and it is more effective. Then we have what's called artificially acquired active immunity. This is when we take a test tube, we neuter or we hinder the virus in some way so that it's not as deadly. We weaken it. Sometimes we even just kill it and let our body fight it. It is from an artificial source, and we expose our body to it. It is like a vaccine. It is a vaccine. Now, even though it's a weakened or deadened pathogen, my body will look at it, try to figure out what's going on, will fight it, and then analyze the antigen and make antibodies. So it is active because my body is making the antibodies. Now we get to the third type. So we looked at naturally acquired active, which means it's the way nature intended it, and my body does make the antibodies. Then we had artificially acquired active, which means it comes from a test tube, but my body is still doing the work. Then we have what's called naturally passive, naturally acquired passive immunity. It is the way it happens in nature. If I'm stranded on a desert island and something comes up and this happens, that means it's the way nature intended it, but it would be where my body's not taking part in creating the antibodies. This is breastfeeding. Antibodies pass from the fetus, from the pregnant woman, to the active immunity of a newborn. It's either through the placentum or through the breast milk. It is the way nature intended it, and it is where the baby, because the baby doesn't produce the antibodies, it is considered passive. All right, so once again, going through the three we've looked at, naturally acquired active. If no laboratory was around, no needles were around, this is the way it would happen, and it is where my body takes an active role in it. My body creates the antibodies. Then we have artificially acquired active, which is a vaccine. It isn't the way that nature would have it, but we put it in our body. Our body actually does make an antibody for it. So our body takes part in it, so it's active. Then we said naturally acquired passive. This is whether it's the antibodies through the placenta or whether it's through breastfeeding. It is the way nature intended it, but the baby, since it's in the baby's body, is passive about it. The baby isn't making those antibodies. And then finally, we get the artificially acquired passive. This is for someone who generally has a very weakened immune system. It is antibodies that are artificially made, or what? Let's just say the antibodies are artificially made, and since our body cannot produce them, it is passive. So up here, this artificial active is going to inject the antibody, and my body is going to attack it and make the antibodies. In artificially acquired passive, this person's immune system won't make the antibodies, so the antibodies themselves are created somewhere and then put into the body. All right, so those are the four. Again, it's pretty simple as long as you just pay attention to the two different sets of words, and they definitely tell you what's going on with that. Now, this is hypersensitivity reactions. This is when our body is going to overreact to something, all right, or miss something. So there are four types, and they're listed in Roman numerals: type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Type 4 is kind of special and on its own. The other three are really about antibodies and antigens. Now, type 1, immediate reaction, is an overproduction of IgE antibodies. I told you when we looked at the categories of antibodies, IgE is the least common. If you remember gamed and remember the D and the E are inverted, the IgE are the least common, but they are the ones that they overreact and cause allergies, kind of like hay fever, sinus stuff. Type 2 are antibody-dependent cytotoxic reactions. All right. This is what we talk about with a blood transfusion. I should have circled this part. This is all about the blood transfusion. So I want you to remember that. It's going to, the antigen is going to be attacked, and there's going to be a lot of things that go on with agglutination and phagocytosis. So type 2 is a mismatched blood transfusion. Type 3, this is going to be a type of rheumatoid arthritis. It is considered an autoimmune disease. Type 3 is where, so what's going on in arthritis, especially rheumatoid arthritis, when our body is trying to break down certain things, and the antibodies are supposed to trigger the phagocytes to come in and clean up the debris, but they don't. And so in the joints, in the synovial fluid, this debris accumulates, and that causes a wear and tear of the joint that we call arthritis, particularly rheumatoid arthritis. Type 4, if you've ever had to have a TB test, type 4 is a TB test, and it's called a delayed reaction, and that's what it is. You take the TB test, they give you the little shot, and you have to come back a little later on to see if it is reacted. Now this one, type 4, is the only one that isn't antibody antigen dealing. It is all about the T cells and the macrophages, and they release chemicals into the skin. Again, dermatitis is the main one. That's why it's in the skin when they check for TB. All right. So hypersensitivity, as it says here, is just an exaggerated immune response to something that in generally is not harmful. And something goes on where the body is generally pre-sensitized to a certain antigen. Something has happened to trigger our body in a memory in our body that will attack a certain thing. And again, pretty much everybody is associated as effect with allergies. And so, it is what it is. It's where our body goes a little haywire. This again is the four types with a little bit more of a specific idea. Again, type 1, I want you to know, is about IgE antibodies. Right? It is an allergic reaction, allergies, type 1. Type 2, this is transfusion reaction. This is agglutination type thing. Type 3, what I want you to know, rheumatoid arthritis. It is going to generally happen. It is about phagocytosis. It is where the phagocytosis is not happening properly. And type 4, TB, this is, again, the only one that is not a antigen antibody type thing. It is all about the actual T cells. Antigen antibodies, these three are all about things going on with the B cells. This type 4 is the only one that is the T cell. Now this is kind of showing the cycle of the allergy. It's going to set off, an allergen comes in, the B cell is going to bind to it. This bypasses the antigen presenting thing, because this is going to be generally where the B cell goes. The B cell will automatically turn into plasma cells, start secreting antibodies to try and attack the allergen. This is going to release histamine, which histamine is generally a good thing. It's going to cause swelling, but this is happening in the respiratory tract. That swelling is going to be in the bronchial tubes, and that's going to cause you not to be able to breathe. Now, the opposite, just to give you a little thing, and I probably shouldn't say this, but just to let you know, a little FYI, histamine is the opposite of adrenaline in what it does. Not when it's released or anything. Histamine causes certain things to vasodilate, to swell, and certain things to vasoconstrict, tighten up. The exact opposite pattern is what adrenaline does. Adrenaline causes certain things to vasodilate, open up, and certain things to vasoconstrict. The reason you want an EpiPen if you are worried about allergies is because of the fact that epinephrine, which is adrenaline, counteracts histamine. That's the whole point of it. All right, sorry, I shouldn't have got sidetracked there. Now, the last little part of this we're going to look is how our body, we're learning how we can give, certain organs from one person to another and help our body not reject it, because every cell has these self markers on it. But if we get certain things aren't as closely scrutinized, certain things can be transplanted. This is a list of them. And it's a tough list when I think about some of this stuff. But it's amazing that we can do it. The heart, the pancreas, the liver, kidney, cornea, bone marrow. This should say red bone marrow, because that's what you'd be trying to get. When the donor's tissue is recognized as foreign, there is a tissue rejection reaction. Right? What that's saying is, all of a sudden your body's going to go, wait a minute, this doesn't have my address on it. That's it, and it'll attack it. It resembles the cellular immune response against the antigens. The T cells will just come in and be like, you're mine, buddy. And the antibodies will be doing the same thing. So it's important to match the major histocompatibility antigens between donor and recipient. Remember, these are the things that we're going to take, those macrophages are going to use to present the antigens. So this is the key, being able to match that. So if something happens and we can't, reverse it, you have to take immunosuppressive drugs that will prevent this reaction. But it also it prevents your immune system to functioning fully anyway. So there's different types of transplants. You've got an isograph, which is pretty rare, but it would be the best possible if it's not from yourself, which is from an identical twin. An autograph, which just simply means it's from you. An oleograph, which means that I am getting it from a donor, but it is a relative, at least from the same species. And then a xenograph, which means that it's from a different species. And oddly enough, pigs end up being a very similar type of MHC in their bodies, particularly their heart. So their heart valves are things that can be used as transplants. So autographs and isographs would not cause tissue rejection. Allographs and xenografts always carry a chance of a rejection reaction. So autoimmunity, an attack on the immune system against own tissues. The immune system fails to distinguish self from non-self, and the body produces antibodies, which are called autoantibodies. They're not good. That's bad. the cytotoxic T cells start attacking the body's tissues and organs, and various immune disorders affect different cells. It's a bad thing, and these are different things. Like we say with arthritis, right? There's a lot of autoimmune diseases that are on the rise. There are several theories concerning the cause of autoimmune diseases, but no single cause has been established. This is a list of some of them. Look, glomerulonephritis. At this point, I am hoping that you would be able, or at least at the end of this semester, you should be able to tell me what this is. The glomerulus is kidneys. It's the nephron, the nephritis, right? This is where the kidney cell antigens that resemble streptococcal bacterial antigens will get attacked by our body. Our body will assume that these kidney cells are strep, and it'll attack it. Graves' disease. Right? This is the thyroid gland antigens near thyroid stimulating hormone receptor cause overreactivity. And so we start producing more. And so this causes weight loss. Man, anytime you mess with the thyroid, you end up causing all kinds of diseases and weird, odd manifestations. Everything from hair loss to weight gain or loss, just all kinds of things. Diabetes type 1, diabetes mellitus. All right, that gives the idea thirst, hunger, weakness. Okay. This is where our body attacks these beta cells that are in the pancreas. We're going to look at how in the pancreas we have this area called the pancreatic isle cells, and there's alpha and beta cells in here. Beta cells secrete insulin. There's a type, and they just now discovered it, within 6 months, I believe, they discovered that there's a certain type of T cell they did not even know that actually will attack these beta cells, right? So type 1 diabetes is that. Hemolytic anemia, fatigue and weakness, the red blood cells, our body starts attacking red blood cells, and so they're going to be low. No oxygen carrying capability or low oxygen carrying capability, anemia. MS, multiple sclerosis, this is awful. Myelination, the body will attack the Schwann cells and the oligodendrocytes. This causes all kinds of disruptions because it messes with the communication cables. Myasthenia gravis, muscle weakness, receptors for the neurotransmitter on skeletal muscles. Those are, all muscles, all skeletal muscles use acetylcholine. There's receptors for acetylcholine on the skeletal muscles. This says my body is attacking these, and so I can't send signals to the muscles to contract, so I'm going to be weak. Pernicious anemia, again, anemia, it's got to be some sort of, end up with some sort of thing in blood. So the binding sites for vitamin B on the cells in the lining of the stomach, this is going to cause, remember B12 is intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is for synthesis of DNA, and particularly in red blood cells. Fatigue and weakness, because I can't absorb intrinsic factor, so I'm going to have problems carrying oxygen. Rheumatic fever, rheumatic fever is a weird one. The heart valve, the antigens on the heart valve, our body will again confuse it for strep and attack it. This is a tough thing. Rheumatoid arthritis, we talked about this, the linings of the joint cells. This is that type 3 hypersensitivity reaction. The body just starts going crazy. It doesn't figure out what's good and what's bad. It attacks the good and it ignores the bad. Oh, lupus, rash on the face. Right? This is where your body starts attacking connective tissue. And ulcerative colitis, the body starts attacking colon cells. Now, I'm not going to expect you to know all of these. I would expect you to know about rheumatoid arthritis because we talked about it with the type 4 hypersensitivity. I would want you to know Graves' disease is the thyroid. I do want you to know diabetes mellitus is the beta cells of the pancreas. I want you to know multiple sclerosis is about the myelin producing cells. And myasthenia gravis, I'll pick 5 of these. Myasthenia gravis is all about the skeletal muscles, acetylcholine. Those are things that will come up, and and again, if they haven't already come up, they will be coming up as we go through. So those are the ones I want you to know. I said 5, I'm going to say 6 because we did talk about Graves' disease. Lifespan changes. Look, everything in your body functions on a use it or lose it. And as we get older, we don't use things as much and we tend to lose them, especially if we didn't exercise them when we were in shape, right? There's a higher risk for infection and cancer as you get older. This is also because of the amount of genetic abnormalities in all, as you're sitting here watching this video right now, it's at 25, 26 minutes. This video, while you're watching it, you have made billions of copies of DNA in your body. And throughout your life, every time there's a copy made of that, there's a chance that there's going to be a mutation in it. Your body does a great job of recognizing it, but as you get older, that chance increases. T cell numbers decrease, but the B cell numbers usually do not change, except for their activity levels. Both of them, their activity levels decline. Antibody response to antigens becomes slower. AGA and AGG antibodies increase, and the AGM and AGE decrease. Elderly may not be candidates for certain medical treatments that suppress immunity, such as chemotherapy, because of the fact that with a lower immunity, there comes a risk of because chemotherapy is going to suppress the immunity even more, that cause real damage. Well, that is chapter 16 and the immune system.